In this daily drop, we're going to take a look at the evolution of the lighting and camera diagrams I did last week for the shoot I'm on this week. So let's go. Okay, here we are. And if you're watching this on Tuesday, then I'm actually on set at this time and hopefully have worked out all of the last minute things related to this production. Now, the reason I used set.a.light 3D last week was I'm doing a green screen shoot. There's going to be a virtual set. I'm going to a soundstage I've never worked on before, and the crew is incredibly small. So pre-production, planning, pre-visualization is going to be a huge, huge advantage to getting to the finish line with this production. So what I want to do is first recommend, if you haven't seen it, check out the episode from last Friday. And now I'm going to head over to the computer and show you where we are now in terms of the stuff that I've been sharing with both the owner / studio manager of the soundstage and also my client. So let's get to it. Okay, so here we are in preview. I'm not actually in set.a.light because what I wanted to do was show you the basically screenshots that I took in the app in terms of the evolution here. So the first thing we're taking a look at is what I'm calling sort of the master. It's an overhead master. And you can see that the big change, if you watch the last episode, is the position of the light fixtures, the modifiers. I've got floppy cutters in there now. And if we go to the second image, this is essentially the reverse. The other thing is that the monitor or the screen has been moved closer to the cyc. It's only about 2 feet away. And that's really because when I started to take a look at the virtual set that was going to be used, I realized that the placement of the monitor, the distance of the monitor to talent and everything was a little bit off. So I started to make some changes. And it's not perfect here, but it's definitely in the ballpark of where it needs to be. Also, the cameras are a little bit closer to each other now so that we can get the angles that we need. And if you look at the left-hand side of the inspector area of set.a.light, you can glean a lot of information there as I go through each one of these different exported screenshots. And here we are taking a look at it from a side view. So you can see that monitor has moved further away from talent. Again, it's about 2 feet away from the wall. Talent's about 10 feet away from the wall. And our cameras are about 18 feet or about 8 feet away from talent. And then if we take a look here, this is really our master shot. So we're taking a look at the setup here with two 600-watt COB lights going through lanterns, which is essentially breaking the light. And then those are going through 8x8 modifiers that are about a one-stop in terms of diffusion. And then in the top right, if you take a look at it, it's a full-frame camera because we're going to be using an R5C for the A camera. It's set to a T8. That's the way the app is set up. There may be a preference to set it to f-stops, but T or T-stops really has to do with true transmission of light to and through a lens to a sensor or a film plane. And still 800 ISO, daylight, 23.98. And then again, on that left-hand side in the inspector, you can see the position of the camera, X and Y, the height of the camera, that basic stuff. Those could be, the last three, pitch, roll, and yaw, could really actually be zeroed out, but they're close enough right now. Now we're looking at our B camera at a 40 millimeter focal length. You can see up in the top right, it's actually a crop sensor. This is going to be a C300 Mark II, as is C camera. Still the same stop, and then the position and everything else related to that camera. We go here to C camera, and it's basically just the reverse of B. We're getting that single of the other person. So if we take a look at this slide here, what we're looking at is now information related to the light fixtures. This is the one to the left, And you can see its position. It's 6 feet away from that left-hand wall. It's 18 feet away from the cyc wall, so essentially in line with the cameras. The height is just under 7 feet, and the yaw is, and this is really sort of like how you're panning the fixture, is 55 degrees. And now we'll take a look at the right fixture, and essentially the measurements just match, but on the other side of the room. And then we go down to the actual modifiers themselves. You can see where those are positioned, their height. And you'll also notice that the light reduction has been set to 1 in the inspector on the left-hand side of the parameters. In the previous build I did last week, I didn't really pay attention to that, and I had it set to a lower value. So when I was taking a look at the set, I wasn't getting a completely accurate idea of what my exposure was going to be. I don't have it turned on here, but there is also a histogram in set.a.light, which is pretty awesome. And you can see the icon for it on the right-hand side where you see that master shot. Now here, I wanted to make sure that if for some reason the setup that I had before wasn't enough, meaning if we were trying to get an aperture of an 8 and we didn't get a deep enough depth of field, and we needed to have some flexibility there, that we would change the light fixtures modifier. So you can see here that I've switched to reflectors on those 2 fixtures. The position has changed. We are further away from the 8x8 modifiers in order to fill those frames. And we're at about 60% now. We were at 100% with the lanterns, but because the reflectors are more intensified, we're actually reducing the amount of output that's coming out of the fixtures. I've also panned them a little bit so that we don't get hot spots on the background. So they're basically panned slightly towards the center of the room a little bit more by about 10 degrees. You'll see the yaw is 65 degrees now instead of 55 degrees. And that's basically what we're doing here for the 2 lights. And the big thing besides that is if you look in the top right, you can see that the aperture now is at an 11. So even deeper depth of field. Now, there were some comments last week about depth of field for green screen shoots. And for me, it's always deep depth of field unless there's a very, very specific reason to have extremely shallow depth of field on your subject matter. Because once you're softening that, including the person's hair, not a problem for me, but it is for a lot of people, then keying is going to be even harder because all of that green and everything else is mushing together. Well, if you think about that shallow depth of field, there's less separation between your background and your middle ground or your subject matter. And that's just going to make keying more difficult. So I like to live most of the time in about an 8 to an 11 range, and I'll lock that in. It doesn't mean I'm changing it throughout the shoot. And that does mean that you're going to need more light. I will say that a lot of people tend to overlight their green screens, so you don't have to blast your green background, just make it even. And really, it's incredibly important to get correct exposure on your talent. So here we are at an 11, and that's really the reason that we've changed over to those reflectors. Now, we're back to the lanterns here, but the only reason I'm doing this is a variation I spoke to my client about where they wanted to see the monitor or the big screen larger in the frame, both for reference and also for talent position, because this is more accurate to what people are going to see and the size of the screen in the virtual set. So you can see that with the master and then the B cam and then the C cam. Now we may need to take B and C and bring those a little bit closer to A to tighten this up a little bit in terms of the singles, or bring talent in a little bit more, but this is pretty accurate now to probably what we're going to have to deal with. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure of, especially for the talent that's camera right on the right side of the frame in the master here, is that we weren't running into big problems with reflections. So you can see here this overhead shot, and one of the things that I'm doing to mitigate reflections in the talent's eyes, or really the talent's glasses on the right side of frame, is this wall of floppy cutters or just a black background. Now, we may walk into the stage and that may be black already. It may be dark already, and we may not have these problems. But I've already communicated via email with the stage manager about this so that we are prepared for this to happen if it needs to. And then you'll see here just another view of that shot, and you'll see the master over there. Oh, there's the histogram on the right-hand side, so you can see that. And again, we may swap this out to reflectors, get a little bit more output, and even stop down a little bit in the final frames. And then I wanted to make sure I could really see what was happening with those glasses. So I went to our B camera and increased the focal length of the camera to a 70 millimeter so we can actually see what that looks like. And we are going to have 24 to 70s on these cameras anyway. So this would be basically the tightest shot we would have. And we're actually never going to have a shot that's this tight. And then just to see what it looks like with the C camera, but again, not really worried about reflections because the person's not wearing glasses, but that gives you a general idea. So yeah, all right, I'm going to head back to the camera and we're going to wrap this thing up. So there you have it. That is the evolution of the planning for this particular production. And I think that when you're in a situation like this, with such a small crew and some unknowns in terms of the location and that kind of stuff, that spending a little bit of extra time before the production makes a lot of sense. It should help me tremendously when I get to the location to work with the stage manager and dial things in. Don't forget to, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Daily Drop.